Think a bad Christmas dinner ends with bitter sarcasm and swallowed tears? You are wrong. When my brother called me a nobody, he had no idea he just awakened a ghost from the cyber intelligence world. And when my four-star general grandfather walked in, it was not to defend me. It was a death knell for their arrogance. Pour some bourbon, and let me tell you how I buried two arrogant men on their own stage. Hello, dear listeners of Vivian Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep the lights on and our team paid. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the PayPal link in the video description or comments, so our staff can afford their living expenses and continue bringing you these thrilling tales. My name is Sarah Soto, and this is my story. The crystal chandelier hanging above the vast dining table in our Chicago penthouse caught the ambient light, throwing razor-sharp reflections across the imported fine china. It was Christmas Eve, the one night of the year meant for warmth and family. Yet the air inside the dining room felt significantly colder than the violent blizzards howling off Lake Michigan outside our floor-to-ceiling windows. The room smelled of rich roasted duck, expensive pine needles from the towering tree in the corner, and the cloying, overbearing scent of my brother's designer cologne. I sat at the far, isolated end of the heavy mahogany table, 34 years old, staring intently at the perfectly folded linen napkin resting in my lap. Across the expanse of white silk table runner sat Leo. He was the undisputed golden boy of the family, a hotshot tech chief executive officer whose smug face had recently graced the covers of 3 major business magazines. He leaned back in his custom-tailored Italian leather dining chair, swirling a heavy crystal glass of aged bourbon. The amber liquid caught the light as he looked down the table at me. A cruel smirk played on his lips. He raised his glass in a slow mock toast. "To Sarah," Leo announced, his voice carrying the practiced, booming resonance of a man deeply accustomed to commanding attention in glass-walled boardrooms. "Our very own nobody, a perfect example of someone completely unworthy of the Soto family legacy." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I just slowly inhaled the stifling, cinnamon-scented air. To his right, our father, Julian Soto, offered a slow, approving nod. Julian was a prominent local politician currently running a vicious, heavily funded campaign for the state senate. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, not a single strand out of place, and his smile was rigorously trained for the flashing cameras of the press. "Leo is absolutely right, Sarah," Julian said, slicing a piece of his duck with cold, surgical precision. "You are 34 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A low-paying government desk job. You push meaningless papers for pennies. You offer absolutely zero media value to my political campaign. You are practically invisible to the public, and frankly, you are an utter embarrassment when the press asks me about my family." I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the edge of my porcelain plate. I relied on a very old, deeply ingrained habit to suppress the boiling rage expanding in my chest, mentally counting the rhythmic ticks of the antique grandfather clock standing in the hallway. Let them talk. Let them look at me and see a frumpy, uninspired government clerk. Let them see a pathetic woman who made barely enough money to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. Not a single person in this opulent, suffocating room knew the actual truth. They did not know that I was a senior black money analyst at the Aegis Vanguard Directorate, commonly known as AVD. It was a highly classified shadow organization, a non-governmental intelligence agency operating entirely off the books and completely in the dark. While Leo bragged endlessly about his public software algorithms, I spent my long days dismantling international criminal syndicates, tracing billions in laundered funds, and breaking encryption codes that would make his engineers weep. I was invisible, yes, but not because I was a failure. I was invisible because my job demanded absolute, lethal secrecy. The heavy, oppressive silence that followed my father's harsh scolding was suddenly shattered by a rhythmic, solid sound. Tap, tap, tap. The heavy strike of a wooden cane against the polished marble floor echoed from the grand hallway. The temperature in the dining room seemed to drop another 10 degrees instantly. General Diego Soto stepped into the arched doorway. My grandfather was 85 years old, a highly decorated, retired four-star campaign commander. Despite his failing heart condition and the physical frailness that inevitably comes with old age, he stood like an immovable granite monolith. His eyes, completely unclouded by the passing years, were as sharp as a newly honed razor, cutting right through the thick, pretentious atmosphere of the dining room. He did not yell. A military general of his supreme caliber never needed to raise his voice to command a room. He walked slowly toward the table, his wooden cane clicking with deliberate, measured menace. He stopped right behind my chair, his intense gaze fixed directly on Leo and Julian. "Look at the two of you," General Diego said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Men wearing perfectly tailored, obscenely expensive suits, yet parading the absolute cheapest of morals. Leo swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, his arrogant smirk completely melted into a tense, fearful grimace. Julian set his silver knife down on the table, his polished political smile entirely gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression of anxiety. "If she is unworthy of this name," the general continued, his tone dripping with absolute, freezing disdain, "then perhaps this name has been dirtied by you yourselves." A heavy, suffocating blanket of silence fell over the room, so absolute that you could hear the wind howling against the glass outside. General Diego placed a heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder and squeezed it gently. It was the very first piece of genuine affection I had felt all evening. He tapped my shoulder twice, a silent, ingrained military signal telling me it was time to move. I stood up gracefully, leaving my completely untouched holiday dinner behind. As we turned together to walk out of the hostile dining room, my grandfather paused his steps. He did not bother to look back over his shoulder, but his voice echoed against the high, vaulted ceiling, precise and incredibly deadly. "Do not think I do not know what you are digging under the foundation of my house." Before I stepped out of the room, I caught a quick glimpse of my father in the dark, reflective surface of the nearest window pane. Julian's face had drained of all its healthy color, turning a sickly, terrified ash white. The wealthy golden boy and the aspiring state senator were suddenly frozen in their expensive seats like statues. They truly believed they were the smartest predators sitting in this house. They were dead wrong. The drive from Illinois to Arlington took 14 grueling hours. I barely stopped for gas. The Midwestern snowstorm bled into the sharp rain of Virginia. By the time my tires screeched against the concrete of the subterranean garage, the pathetic sister from the dining room was gone. I swiped my Level 5 biometric badge. The blast-proof steel doors of the Aegis Vanguard Directorate hissed open. I walked past the checkpoint without a single word. The command center hummed with the aggressive energy of a dozen servers. I threw my coat over a chair and immediately synced into my terminal. We were in the middle of a live crisis. A transnational syndicate was washing massive amounts of dirty money through decentralized cryptocurrency nodes. I hammered the mechanical keyboard. My eyes scanned the scrolling strings of encrypted data. Isolate the nodes. Trace the digital wallets. Fast. Ruthless. Unforgiving. Suddenly, my secondary monitor flashed a harsh red warning. An incoming transmission. It was not an agency alert. It was a heavily encrypted burst bouncing off an obsolete, decades-old military satellite frequency. Only one person still utilized that specific tactical bandwidth. "Secure line active," I stated into the headset. "Get to the suburban estate," General Diego commanded. No greeting. Just pure tactical authority. "Now." I handed off the crypto trace and grabbed my keys. 40 minutes later, I bypassed the heavy iron gates of his secluded property, finding my grandfather in his dark oak study. The fire was unlit. The room was freezing. "Julian made his play," the general said, gripping his cane. He abruptly fired Dr. Evans. He replaced him with a puppet physician currently on his campaign payroll. My medical portal updated this morning. The charts are completely falsified. I drew my encrypted tactical tablet from my bag. My fingers flew across the glass. I bypassed the local hospital firewall in exactly 45 seconds. I pulled the newly submitted medical files. "Advanced dementia," I read aloud, my voice flat and cold. "Severe rapid cognitive decline. Paranoia. They are officially documenting a total loss of your mental faculties." "Dig deeper," he ordered. I routed my connection through a proxy server and sliced into the county court registry. I hunted for sealed dockets. I found it instantly. "A conservatorship petition," I said, staring at the digital signatures. "Julian and Leo filed it exactly 48 hours ago. They are petitioning the state to strip you of all legal and financial autonomy. They are making a play for total control of your assets." My grandfather did not look shocked. He looked ready for war. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a thick metallic rectangle. He tossed it onto the heavy oak desk. It landed with a dense thud. "Lead-lined," I noted, picking up the heavy flash drive. "Military-grade shielding. The complete, unredacted financial ledgers of the Soto Veterans Foundation," he explained. The foundation was his greatest achievement. A multi-million-dollar charity providing essential housing for combat veterans. It was the crown jewel of our family name. I plugged the drive into my tablet. A massive array of financial data populated the screen. I immediately ran a proprietary agency discrepancy algorithm. The tablet screen lit up with bright red flags. "There is a massive financial bleed," I stated, watching the numbers drop. "Millions of dollars are missing, systematically siphoned off through a labyrinth of shell corporations over the last 6 months." The tactical board in my mind suddenly illuminated. The puzzle pieces snapped violently together. Julian and Leo were not filing for conservatorship out of simple petty greed. They were driven by pure, absolute terror. "They are panicking," I said, meeting my grandfather's icy stare. "Someone is aggressively embezzling from the foundation. The mandatory federal audit is scheduled for exactly 3 months from today. If you are still in control when the auditors arrive, they will easily trace the missing money. But if you are legally declared mentally incompetent, Julian and Leo can legally seize the organization. They will bury these ledgers and blame the missing millions on your supposed dementia." The general nodded slowly. "They intend to use my honor as a graveyard for their crimes." I closed the tablet. The staccato rhythm of the hunt was now pulsing in my veins. The transition was complete. They wanted a war in the shadows. I was about to give them one. I needed raw, unfiltered computing power. The kind of terrifying digital infrastructure that required Level 5 security clearances I officially possessed, but legally should never utilize for personal matters. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the morning when I slipped into the subterranean server farm of the Directorate. The massive room was freezing, artificially maintained at a constant, biting temperature to prevent the towering rows of quantum processors from melting down under heavy loads. The black server racks hummed with a deep, aggressive vibration. I patched my tactical tablet directly into an emergency maintenance terminal, carefully routing my digital footprint through 7 international dummy servers to completely mask my unauthorized access. I took the heavy, lead-lined drive my grandfather had handed me earlier and fed the bleeding financial ledgers of the charity into the agency's primary analytical engine. I commanded the supercomputer to aggressively cross-reference the stolen veteran funds with every single corporate account, offshore trust, and shell company registered anywhere in the world under my brother's name. The loading bar crawled across the screen. I held my breath, listening to the whir of the cooling fans. If internal security caught this massive unauthorized query, I would be facing federal treason charges before the sun even came up. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, the terminal flashed a bright, blinding green. A massive, complex web of financial nodes materialized before my eyes. I zoomed in on the central routing hub. It was Leo's company, the so-called revolutionary artificial intelligence startup that the financial media constantly drooled over. I sliced through the encrypted commercial firewalls of his corporate accounts, fully expecting to see millions in legitimate venture capital. Instead, I found a terrifying hollow void. The entire company was a complete phantom. The brilliant software algorithm Leo claimed to have invented, the one he gave arrogant keynote speeches about, was nothing but a cheap, outsourced piece of code running on basic rented cloud servers. His entire operation was running on fumes, standing exactly 1 millimeter away from total catastrophic bankruptcy. He had absolutely zero real clients. He had zero actual revenue. To keep his wealthy, successful facade alive, he was using the Soto Veterans Foundation as a massive, illegal transit hub. He was filtering phantom investments through the charity, effectively washing the money to make his artificial intelligence company look incredibly profitable to the outside world. But a massive, glaring logical error stared back at me. You cannot wash money if you do not have dirty money to begin with. Where was a failing tech bro getting tens of millions in raw, untraceable cash? I opened a secondary, highly secure window and pulled up the active case file I had been working on earlier that night. I ran a comparative algorithmic overlay. I needed to see if the transaction patterns matching Leo's mysterious deposits shared any structural similarities with the syndicate's dispersion methods. The supercomputer churned for exactly 3 seconds. Then, a 100% match alert locked onto the screen. My blood ran completely cold. The rhythmic beating of my heart echoed violently in my ears. The raw cash flooding into Leo's failing company was not from desperate angel investors or foolish hedge funds. The transaction signatures matched the exact digital fingerprint of the violent international cartel I was currently hunting for the federal government. Leo had not just taken out a bad business loan. My arrogant, foolish brother had borrowed tens of millions of dollars from some of the most ruthless, heavily armed criminals on the entire planet. And Julian knew everything. The digital paper trail exposed massive political cover-ups, quiet campaign donations designed to keep regulatory eyes completely away from Leo's fake empire. Julian was actively using every ounce of his political leverage to stall state investigators. That was exactly why they needed control of the foundation immediately. The Securities and Exchange Commission was scheduled for a mandatory, deep-dive audit in precisely 90 days. If the federal auditors saw the cartel money mixing with the charity funds, the entire family would go to federal prison. They desperately needed my grandfather out of the way, so they could bury the evidence deep beneath a mountain of falsified medical lies. We could not fight this in a bright, clean courtroom. The following night, under the cover of a freezing, torrential downpour, my grandfather and I stood inside an abandoned shipping warehouse in the industrial district. The rusted metal roof echoed loudly with the sound of the heavy rain. A black luxury sedan idled in the dark shadows. Valeria Knox stepped out into the damp air. She was a veteran defense attorney, a woman who had spent 40 years navigating the absolute darkest corners of corporate law. She wore a heavy trench coat and smoked a thin cigarette, looking intently at the encrypted files I had printed for her under the dim glow of a single hanging bulb. Valeria shook her head slowly, the glowing ember of her cigarette illuminating her grim, weathered face. "This is a total nightmare, Diego," Valeria said, her voice sharp and uncompromising. "Your grandson has tied a cartel noose tightly around the neck of your charity. If we go to the authorities right now, if we blow the whistle conventionally, the blast radius will destroy everything you built. The federal government will instantly freeze the foundation. Over 500 disabled veterans will be thrown out onto the street in less than 30 days. The media will paint you as the mastermind. They will broadcast that a retired general used his veteran charity to wash cartel blood money. Your military honor, your entire life's work, will be completely eradicated before we even get to a trial." My grandfather stood perfectly still. The damp cold of the warehouse seemed to seep into the concrete, but his jaw remained locked in absolute defiance. "I will not let those two cowards destroy my men's sanctuary," he growled. I stepped out of the shadows, pulling my coat tighter against the bitter chill. I looked at Valeria, then at my grandfather. "We do not go to the authorities," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the sound of the heavy rain. "We do not use conventional law. If they want to play in the dark, we will bury them in it." My grandfather turned his sharp gaze toward me. "What are you suggesting, Sarah?" "Asymmetric warfare," I replied without hesitation. "Julian and Leo think they are hunting a weak, senile old man, and they are completely ignoring a useless sister. We will not attack them directly. We will borrow a knife to kill. We will take Leo's blind, arrogant greed and turn it into the exact weapon that destroys him. We let them think they are winning. We let them take the bait." Valeria raised an eyebrow, a flicker of dangerous curiosity sparking in her eyes. "You are playing with a live grenade, kid. You make one mathematical error, and the cartel will handle the execution themselves." "I know exactly how to pull the pin," I said quietly. I had spent my entire professional career mapping the psychological weaknesses of financial criminals. Leo was entirely predictable. His massive ego was a fatal blind spot. We were going to build a beautiful golden cage, leave the front door wide open, and watch him happily lock himself inside. The first move in any successful ambush is making your enemy firmly believe they have already won. I waited until Tuesday evening to make the initial move. I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, practicing the exact tremor in my voice for several minutes before I finally dialed Julian's private number. When he answered, I let out a long, perfectly engineered sigh. "Dad," I whispered, forcing my tone to sound entirely exhausted and thoroughly defeated. "I am tired. I cannot fight this family anymore. I want out." I heard the distinct clink of a glass on the other end of the line. He was probably pouring a drink to celebrate before I even finished the sentence. "I will sign away my rights to the inheritance," I continued, making my voice crack just a fraction to sell the illusion. "I just want peace. I want to be left alone." "Finally showing some sense, Sarah," Julian replied. His voice was dripping with absolute, unfiltered condescension. "You always were too fragile for the real world. A classic nobody. Come to Leo's office tomorrow. We will have the corporate lawyers draft the relinquishment forms." Leo's corporate headquarters was a nauseating monument to tech vanity. It was filled with glass walls, exposed brick, and ridiculous ping-pong tables scattered across the lobby. I walked into his corner office wearing an oversized gray sweater, keeping my shoulders slumped, playing the role of the broken, irrelevant sister to absolute perfection. Leo sat behind a massive desk carved from reclaimed wood, a smug grin plastered securely across his face. Julian stood by the window, checking his heavy gold watch. They slid a thick stack of legal documents across the dark table. "Just sign at the bottom of page 42 and page 56, Leo instructed, tossing a heavy silver pen toward me with casual disrespect. I picked up the pen with intentionally trembling fingers. Reaching forward, I deliberately knocked over a tall glass of sparkling water sitting near the edge of the desk. The cold liquid spilled directly onto Leo's expensive Italian leather shoes. "Damn it, Sarah," Leo shouted, jumping back violently and grabbing a stack of napkins. Julian rolled his eyes, turning toward the window in sheer disgust. In the exact 2 seconds their eyes were diverted, my left hand slipped under the sleek desk. I retrieved a microdata cloning node from my sleeve, a specialized piece of agency hardware no larger than a standard piece of chewing gum. With practiced surgical precision, I jammed it directly into the primary network port, connecting Leo's secure terminal to the internal building server. A microscopic green light pulsed exactly one time. The physical breach was complete. I spent the next 10 minutes apologizing profusely while signing my own financial execution papers. I walked out of that glass tower, leaving them entirely convinced they had defeated me. While I built the digital guillotine in the shadows, my grandfather executed his theatrical role with the terrifying brilliance of a seasoned military spy. During the required Sunday family dinners, the proud, imposing four-star general began to visibly crumble. He allowed his hands to shake violently while holding his soup spoon. He would randomly stare blankly at the wall for minutes at a time. The absolute masterpiece of his performance occurred when he looked directly at Leo and called him by my uncle's name, asking him about a military deployment from 30 years ago. Julian and Leo exchanged triumphant, predatory glances across the dining table. They genuinely believed the alleged dementia was taking total control. They believed the iron fortress of General Diego was finally collapsing into dust. Their overconfidence blossomed into a dangerous, blinding arrogance. With the physical node securely planted in Leo's office, I had a permanent, undetectable backdoor right into the central nervous system of his fake corporate empire. Sitting in the sterile, freezing command center of the directorate, I carefully prepared the bait. I located a highly monitored offshore account belonging to the international cartel, a specific digital wallet the federal government was already watching very closely. I isolated a massive transfer of dirty funds currently in transit. Using my hidden backdoor, I subtly manipulated the routing protocol. I diverted exactly $2.5 million of violent cartel money straight toward Julian's primary political campaign account, routing it briefly through Leo's corporate servers. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the rat to smell the cheese. My monitors tracked Leo's internal network activity. The moment his automated financial software detected the massive, anomalous cash injection, the system flagged it. A rational, honest executive would immediately freeze the funds and contact federal banking authorities. But Leo was not rational. He was a desperate, drowning man bleeding money. I watched the digital logs in real time as human greed took the wheel. Leo saw $2.5 million floating in the ether. Instead of reporting it, he manually overrode his own security protocols. He diverted the funds into his proprietary laundering cycle, intending to quietly skim a 20% cut to keep his failing company afloat before sending the rest to his father's campaign. He swallowed the bait entirely. He had no idea the money was tagged with a classified federal tracking cipher. He had just officially linked his server, Julian's campaign, and the cartel into one giant glowing neon sign for the Department of Justice. The final stage of their plan was set in stone 2 weeks later. Julian mailed out heavy, gold-embossed invitations for a massive fundraising gala. He invited the governor, local judges, and hundreds of the wealthiest elites in the city. The gala was supposed to be Julian's crowning political achievement. But I knew the real agenda. Julian and Leo planned to use the overwhelming public pressure of the event to force my grandfather to sign the foundation transfer documents on stage. They wanted to corner him in front of flashing cameras, leaving him absolutely no choice but to surrender his legacy to avoid a public scene. They built a magnificent, glittering stage for their ultimate victory. They did not know I was going to use it for their public execution. The grand ballroom of the magnificent five-star hotel in downtown Chicago was a masterclass in aggressive, suffocating opulence. Every single detail of the room had been meticulously engineered to project an illusion of absolute, untouchable power. 10,000 imported white roses dripped from massive overhead floral installations, their sweet, heavy fragrance practically choking the air. Waiters clad in perfectly tailored black tuxedos glided silently across the polished marble floor, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in an entire month. The room was packed with over 300 of the city's most influential politicians, wealthy judges, and elite corporate executives. It was a dazzling, blinding display of high society, entirely built upon a foundation of rotting lies. At the front of the vast room, standing bathed in a warm, golden spotlight beneath a massive velvet banner bearing our family crest, Julian was holding court at the main microphone. He was delivering a sickeningly polished, deeply emotional speech about the sacred duty of preserving a righteous family legacy. His silver hair gleamed under the stage lights, and his practiced political smile was absolutely flawless. Down in the crowded ballroom, Leo was working the wealthy attendees like a starving, predatory shark. He clapped elderly hedge fund managers on the back, laughed loudly at terrible jokes, and flashed his perfectly bleached smile to anyone holding a heavy checkbook. He looked like a man who had already conquered the entire world. Then, the heavy mahogany doors at the very rear of the grand ballroom swung open. I did not sneak in quietly. I walked straight down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The oversized gray sweaters, the hunched shoulders, and the timid, lowered gaze of the pathetic government clerk were completely dead and buried. I wore a floor-length, razor-sharp black evening gown that clung to my frame like liquid obsidian. My hair was pulled back tightly into a severe, elegant twist, and my makeup was immaculate. I looked exactly like what I truly was, an apex predator stepping into a cage full of oblivious prey. Walking closely beside me, matching my exact, measured stride, was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a flawless, dark charcoal suit. He had the cold, evaluating, completely dead eyes of a veteran assassin. The whispering high society guests parting out of our way simply assumed he was my wealthy new boyfriend. They had absolutely no idea he was Commander Vance, the ruthless head of tactical operations for the Aegis Vanguard Directorate. It took exactly 45 seconds for my brother to spot my arrival. The arrogant, triumphant smile vanished from Leo's face in an instant, rapidly replaced by a flash of genuine, visceral panic. He hastily excused himself from a group of wealthy tech investors and rapidly intercepted me near a towering, intricately carved ice sculpture. He grabbed my left elbow, his fingers digging into my skin with bruising force, and dragged me roughly into a secluded, shadowy alcove behind a heavy velvet curtain. Commander Vance immediately took one lethal step forward, his hand drifting dangerously toward his tailored jacket, but I raised a single finger to halt him. I could handle my brother. Leo leaned in so close I could smell the heavy, expensive bourbon and raw, unfiltered desperation on his breath. "What the hell are you doing here, Sarah?" Leo hissed, his eyes darting frantically toward the brightly lit main stage. "If you think you can walk in here, cause a massive scene, and derail this night, you are completely out of your mind. My legal team officially filed the final medical declarations this morning. We have absolute, undeniable proof the old man is entirely lost to advanced dementia. The legal conservatorship is locked tight and signed by a judge. You are not getting a single dime of that charity money, so you better turn around and walk out those doors right now before I have my security team physically throw you onto the street." I looked down calmly at his trembling hand gripping my arm, then slowly raised my head to meet his panicked, bloodshot eyes. I offered him a smile so terrifyingly cold it could have instantly frozen the champagne sitting in his glass. "I did not come here to take your money, Leo," I whispered softly, my voice perfectly steady and dripping with lethal intent. "I came here to watch you perform." I violently jerked my arm free from his grasp and walked past him, smoothly joining Commander Vance near the front row of VIP tables. Up on the grand stage, the live string quartet slowly faded their music into total silence. Julian tapped the microphone, his face beaming with a manufactured, overwhelming pride. He announced to the breathless room that it was finally time for the historic, deeply emotional transfer of the Soto Veterans Foundation. General Diego emerged from the dark wings of the stage. He walked incredibly slowly, leaning heavily and pathetically on his thick wooden cane. playing the role of the frail, confused, broken old man for one final spectacular time. Julian rushed forward with fake dramatic concern, placing a gentle, patronizing hand on my grandfather's back, guiding him carefully toward the sleek, clear acrylic podium. Julian held a thick, dark leather folder wide open on the lectern. In his right hand, he proudly displayed a heavy gold-plated fountain pen to the captivated audience, his eyes shining with absolute, triumphant, sickening victory. General Diego finally reached the podium. He looked down at the legal documents that would permanently sign away his entire life's work to a pair of thieves. He looked at the gold pen held tightly in Julian's eager hand. But my grandfather did not reach for the pen. Instead, he reached deep into the breast pocket of his heavily decorated military dress uniform. He pulled out a small, highly advanced wireless lapel microphone and confidently clipped it directly to his crisp collar. He slowly straightened his spine. The hunched, trembling posture of a sick old man vanished in an absolute instant. He stood up as incredibly tall and intensely imposing as the day he commanded thousands of troops in the desert. When he spoke, his voice was not the frail, scattered whisper of a dementia patient. It was a booming, thunderous, crystal-clear roar that violently shook the crystal chandeliers hanging high above our heads. "Today, I will transfer my legacy," General Diego declared, his piercing eyes locking directly onto Julian's suddenly terrified, pale face, to the United States Department of Justice. A massive, crushing wave of dead, suffocating silence violently slammed into the grand ballroom. Nobody dared to breathe. Julian froze completely solid, the expensive gold pen slipping entirely from his trembling fingers and clattering loudly against the hard wooden floorboards. High above them, the massive digital projector screen that had been proudly displaying our shining family crest abruptly and violently flickered. The noble crest vanished entirely. In its place, a massive, highly detailed digital mind map illuminated the dark room in a harsh, glaring, unforgiving blue light. It was the Directorate's raw, undeniable financial rendering. Thick, glowing red lines visibly and directly connected Leo's fake corporate accounts and Julian's political campaign funds straight to the exact offshore routing numbers of the most violent international crime syndicate on the planet. The collective gasp from 300 of Chicago's wealthiest elites sounded like a massive vacuum violently sucking the air out of the grand ballroom. I did not wait for the initial shock to dissipate. I left Commander Vance standing alertly by the front VIP tables and walked slowly up the velvet-lined stairs to the brightly lit main stage. My heels clicked with terrifying, undeniable finality against the polished wood. I stepped right past my completely paralyzed father and took my place directly beside my grandfather at the clear acrylic podium. I looked out over the sea of terrified, confused faces, staring down at the powerful men and women who had spent the last 2 hours blindly applauding a pair of absolute frauds. For those of you who do not know me, I spoke directly into the microphone, my voice echoing sharply off the high vaulted ceiling. I am Sarah Soto. My brother recently called me a nobody. He called me a low-level desk clerk, completely unworthy of my family legacy. I paused deliberately, letting my cold gaze sweep over the silent crowd, until I finally found Leo. He was completely frozen next to a towering ice sculpture, his face the exact color of wet ash. He was half right. I do work for the government, but I do not push papers. I am a senior intelligence operative specializing in transnational financial warfare. Julian suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. His deeply ingrained political survival instincts violently kicked in. He lunged frantically toward the microphone, his face flushed with panicked, desperate rage. "Turn off that projector right now. Security, get her off this stage. She is completely insane. Call the local police department immediately." "That will not be necessary, Senator," a deep, gravelly voice echoed from the ballroom floor. Commander Vance stepped forward into the harsh glow of the spotlight. He reached inside his tailored charcoal jacket and pulled out a heavy gold and blue federal badge, holding it high in the air for the entire room to witness. At that exact second, all 8 of the heavy mahogany doors surrounding the grand ballroom violently burst open. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents wearing dark black windbreakers poured into the room. They moved with terrifying tactical precision, instantly locking down every single exit and forming a solid, impenetrable wall of federal authority around the perimeter of the gala. By attempting to steal the Soto Veterans Foundation, I continued, my voice cutting cleanly through the rising panic of the wealthy crowd, Leo did not just commit massive corporate fraud. He attempted to use a charitable fund founded by a decorated United States military general as a digital washing machine for black money. And the syndicate he borrowed that money from is not just a standard criminal cartel. They are officially classified by the Department of Defense as a Tier 1 global high-tech terrorist organization. I looked directly down at my brother, making absolute eye contact. You did not just commit a financial crime, Leo. You committed high treason. The word dropped like a live explosive into the very center of the ballroom. The absolute destruction of their arrogant facade was instantaneous and absolute. Leo broke first. The brilliant, untouchable tech genius shattered into a pathetic, terrified child. He practically sprinted toward the front of the stage, wildly pointing an accusatory finger directly at his own father. "It was his idea!" Leo screamed, his voice cracking hysterically as 2 federal agents moved in to grab his arms. Julian knew exactly where the cash was coming from. He used his political campaign to actively block the state financial investigators. He forced me to do it. He said the charity was the absolutely only way to save his political campaign. Julian recoiled violently as if he had been physically struck in the jaw. The polished, charismatic politician completely evaporated into thin air, leaving behind a cornered, vicious animal. He spat back at his own son, his face contorted in pure, unfiltered hatred. "You lying parasite. I had absolutely zero knowledge of your illegal activities. His software company is a total failure. He acted entirely alone. Do not tie me to your pathetic treason." They viciously tore each other apart. Right there, under the brilliant crystal chandeliers, in front of 300 elite donors and a dozen flashing press cameras, the 2 most arrogant men I had ever known publicly cannibalized each other. They wept. They screamed. They eagerly traded their own flesh and blood for a desperate, impossible chance at survival. It was a punishment far more cruel and absolute than any prison sentence could ever be. It was the total, highly public annihilation of their massive egos. General Diego stood perfectly still amidst the screaming chaos. He raised his heavy wooden cane and struck the stage floor. 1, 2, 3. The sharp, violent cracks cut instantly through the hysterical shouting. Julian and Leo both froze in terror, looking up at the imposing old warrior. "You have disgraced the uniform I bled for," my grandfather said, his voice echoing with absolute, freezing judgment. "You have attempted to rob the men who sacrificed their bodies for this nation. As of this exact second, neither of you are my blood. You are entirely stripped of the Soto name. You are nothing." He turned slowly away from the 2 weeping men and placed his warm, calloused hand on my shoulder. "This legacy belongs entirely to my granddaughter, the only true soldier left in this family." Exactly 6 months later, the brutal storm had finally passed. The viciously fought political campaign of Julian Soto had collapsed into total, catastrophic ruin within 48 hours of the gala. He was currently sitting in a Cold County jail cell, hopelessly awaiting a lengthy federal trial for political corruption, fraud, and conspiracy. Leo was already gone. He had been quickly processed and transferred to a maximum security federal penitentiary, serving a 30-year sentence for international money laundering and severe violations of national security. His revolutionary artificial intelligence company had been aggressively liquidated by the federal government. The digital assets sold off for absolute pennies to pay back the furious investors. I sat quietly on the sunlit wrap-around porch of my grandfather's suburban estate. I was wearing comfortably faded blue jeans and a soft cotton sweater, holding a steaming ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The crisp morning breeze gently rustled the green leaves of the giant oak trees in the front yard. General Diego slowly walked out onto the wooden porch. He sat down heavily in the woven wicker rocking chair right next to mine. He did not say a single word for a very long time, just peacefully watching the birds gather near the garden. Finally, he reached deep into his worn cardigan pocket and pulled out a heavy, incredibly old brass pocket watch. It had deep, jagged scratches on the metal casing, a quiet survivor of 3 different overseas combat deployments. He reached over and gently placed it into the palm of my hand. I closed my fingers tightly around the cool metal. I looked out at the peaceful, quiet lawn, a profound realization settling deeply into my bones. The absolute greatest revenge in the world was not the explosive public destruction of your enemies. The greatest revenge was the quiet, undeniable truth of the aftermath. The arrogant brother who had so confidently called me a nobody was completely gone, his name permanently erased and entirely forgotten by history. Meanwhile, I would quietly return to the freezing subterranean server rooms of the Directorate on Monday morning. I would continue to aggressively hunt the worst monsters on the entire planet. I would remain the invisible shield protecting a nation that would never even know my real name. And that was perfectly fine with me. I did not need the blinding spotlight, nor did I need the hollow applause of the public. I had finally learned the greatest secret of all. The dark shadows are where true, absolute power permanently resides. Thank you so very much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. I would love to know where you are listening to this story from today, so please let me know down in the comments below. If you found today's story entertaining and valuable, please consider helping our team out. YouTube has entirely demonetized our channel, and we rely on your incredible generosity to survive. A simple donation of just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment, will provide our hardworking staff with the funds they desperately need to feed their families and continue creating these wonderful stories for you. Thank you again, and stay safe out there.